Hello, I'm Michael Gunther with Collaboration Business Consulting. I'm excited to have Andrew Farrell here from Howard Fisher. And we're going to talk about the steps building a senior management team. And, in fast-growing companies that you need the right leadership and experience, but you can't always also know how to attract or afford those folks. And so we're going to talk about the pitfalls that we see that are holding companies back from really growing where they need to be growing.
Yeah. Individuals spend their entire careers trying to figure this process out, right? It's just inconceivable to think that somebody, if it's their first or maybe even their second time building an organization, they're going to really get everything right from the get-go. So we're hopefully going to be able to pass on some of our expertise and our knowledge to you today so that you can be a little further along the journey of building a management team than folks that have never seen or had to take this process on before.
Yeah, so let's say a little bit about us quickly. I'm Michael Gunther, again with Collaboration, and our mission is to inspire, educate, and empower leaders to achieve breakthrough performance. Over the last 15 years, we helped start over 275 businesses. I've worked with thousands of leaders and helping them really build profitable, sustainable businesses. And then Andy.
With Howard Fisher Associates, we're an executive and board search firm. We've been in business for 35 years, and in that 35-year time frame, we've executed over 2,500 different searches at the board, CEO, and every functional C-level role that reports to a CEO's team. So in the last, I'd say probably 200 searches or so that we've done, we've only had to replace one individual. So as a firm, we take this entire subject very seriously, but how do you do it? And you do it right the first time around.
Yeah, it's interesting. Andy and I have known each other for many years, and we happened to get together for breakfast one day and started talking about it and realized there are some common themes that we constantly see that organizations and leaders of those organizations making the wrong decisions. And it's hard. And when you're building a company, you're wearing many hats, and sometimes you're trying to take the easy way versus the right way, right? And so what we see often is that people are often making hiring decisions really based on past relationships. So, I worked with Joe over at this company or Jane over at this company. I like that person. I want to hire them as part of my team, but you don't necessarily know if they have the right skill set or the experience necessary, but you like them individually, doesn't necessarily mean they're the right fit.
Yeah.
And I think you see a lot of times, even Jim Collins talks about getting the right people on the bus. Mm-hmm. People, this is the right person on the bus, but they really haven't done a thorough evaluation to really determine that.
Exactly. And part of what we're saying here, it's not that you shouldn't go explore past relationships and colleagues that you've worked with, because it's highly valuable to have information, that's real and material of their working performance. However, that can't be looked at in a vacuum. You have to look at it in the context of this organization today, because if you worked with an individual at a much larger organization back in the day, and you're starting a new venture that's, say, 3 people and a dog in a room trying to keep the lights on, very different culture and environment. So it's going to be important to make sure that you're not just basing that assessment off of what you knew about them at a different point in time and under different circumstances.
Yeah, that's a good point, Andy. The other thing is poor cultural fit. A lot of times I've seen people, they hire people based on the resume. Great experience, or they worked with this size company, and they get excited about their experience versus, is this person the right cultural fit? And as we know from studies and Gallup and all of them, cultural fit is an important element. And so often we see people making the wrong decision because they get caught up in resumes versus caught up in character of that person and cultural fit of that person.
Yeah, and culture fit is one of those things where it exists whether you are conscious of it or not. You have a culture whether you have put it on a poster on the wall and defined your values, or if you haven't even gotten around to that yet.
Right.
And it's important to take the time and be very intentional about what you want your culture to look like and how you want that to manifest in day-to-day work activities, right? And so you've got to evaluate people against what do our values look like on the job? What does integrity, honesty, insert whatever other values you might ascribe to here, make sure that it's consistent with what you want those to look like on the actual job.
Yeah, I think defining that culture is critical. The other thing we see happen is that a lot of times people are fast to hire and slow to fire. And so I need somebody now. And so they hire the wrong person too quickly. But then they keep people on for a long time, longer than they should. And they're not bringing some of that emotional fortitude. So without the proper recruiting and onboarding process, we often see this as one of those other issues that arises with folks.
Absolutely, just like you would in your personal life. If there's too many things and too many priorities, things are going to fall to the wayside.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you were talking about your dating life there for a second. Are you fast
We're not
on
gonna-
fire?
That's actually a very appropriate analogy. Sometimes people hold on to personal relationships much longer than they should.
The new hire is the issue, leading to a revolving door. And we see this where people hire someone, they have their resume, and the leadership team hasn't shifted how they're managing and how they had all these hopes of this person running this department. They had the experience to do it. They're people, they still need to be managed. So we often see that the new hire becomes an issue. So in your organization, if you're always saying, God, we hired all these people, they had all this experience, but they didn't produce, I would look at yourself first as a leader, because that may be the issue going on, not necessarily the right person for your firm.
Absolutely.
The other one is just poor onboarding or not managing new hires. I see this all the time. You know, we work with these businesses and they hire this great president for their organization, but they stop managing them. They kind of like, oh, I can't manage them. They're at a different level. No, they're a person. They still need to be held accountable and need to have clear expectations. And so the other thing, if you're having problems with poor onboarding or your new hires aren't performing at the level you want, that you hope for, again, look at yourself. Are you really managing their onboarding and the expectations through that process?
And it could even be something as simple as, you know, a weekly sit down where you clarify what the expectations are. I mean, how many of us have gone into new situations and thought to ourselves, if I only knew what was expected of me, or at least at a minimum level, I could have been more successful.
Yeah, and so if you're experiencing any of those things as you're trying to build your senior management team, my hunch is you're missing some key elements both on the recruiting side and the onboarding side. So Andy and I are now going to talk about some of those things. But first, think about why these decisions are happening within your organization. And you think, first of all, a lot of these companies are faced with the pressure to hire. They know they don't have the skills to run business development. They don't know the company's grown beyond their capability of a manager and leader. They're getting pressure if they've gotten financing, whether it's private equity or whether it's VC, whatever it may be. They're getting pressure that you need to hire a more senior management team. So the individuals know there's a gap and they're feeling pressure. So often they're making some of the mistakes we just talked about moving too quickly, hiring friends without really understanding, is it the right person? Some of the other decisions going on, Andy, why don't you talk about this and that people aren't necessarily properly evaluated?
Yeah, well, and I think it speaks, this is a byproduct oftentimes of the time pressure, right? If you are in a situation where you are pressed to deliver results and to deliver successes for your investors or whatever your stakeholder group might be, if you're feeling those pressures, very oftentimes it's natural to want to short circuit a process of evaluation or reference checking or candidate due diligence. It's very common to fold under pressure and not follow a plan or a process all the way through to the end. You know, and this is one of the things that we see in our business all the time is because that need is you know, so palpable and so painful every single day. Maybe we don't feel like we need to have that last conversation with a board of directors member, or maybe we don't need to have our CMO talk to the new head of sales because they worked together at a past company, right? There's any number of excuses we can make for why we shouldn't invest just a little bit more additional time into making sure that we get this assessment right.
Right, and so it's understanding the right structures and processes they should be following, right? And they don't realize also what we find is that they've hired the right person who they think is the right person, potentially, but then they don't have an onboarding process or training process. It is amazing to me. We research all our clients and larger firms we work with, and it's amazing how little management training and development people actually have received. And with this, we often find that people get on board. Like we had a client, they've hired a president for their company. It's a family-run business up in the Bay Area. And the president, they weren't managing that person. They weren't having their meetings. They didn't do any onboarding. They just assumed they would let them know if they needed anything. And they almost abdicate their responsibility as a leader. And so we realized the leaders are making the decision of not onboarding because they just assume the person has the skills and experience.
Well, one of the big things that onboarding does for an organization, it will reduce the total time to productivity of that new employee. Again, that's not the sole reason that onboarding exists, but if you do it in the right way and if you actually put some thought and structure to it, you will see that time it takes for a new hire to become fully ramped and productive within your organization, that will drop substantially when you put some thought to it and you're intentional about how you want to bring that person into the organization. Even if it's something simple, like making sure on their first day they have their laptop and their ID badge for the building and they have a desk picked out. Do you really want somebody that you just spent time and money bringing on board having to go find their own way around the building, to find a desk, to find a laptop? By having that stuff taken care of ahead of time, even if it's just in that simple example, you've already given them an entire day of productivity.
Well, it's so interesting. HR Association years ago did a study on that, and they found that people know within the first week working whether they're going to stay with an organization long term.
Yeah, that's
and most of it was based on, was the organization prepared for me?
Yeah.
Do they have my business cards? Do I have my workstation? Is anyone greeting me my first day? What does my first week look like?
Yeah.
We make these assumptions that people can just jump in, and yet, like you said, the path to productivity gets slowed down, and sometimes we then think they're not the right fit because our lack of organizational structure up front and really supporting those folks.
Yeah. By planning and being intentional, you remove a lot of those roadblocks for the individual that's trying to come in and start being productive.
So that last thing here is, and we're kind of alluding to it in our conversation here, is also a lack of clear path of expectations. What's expected in my first 30, 60, 90 days? What are my annual goals? If you don't have them, work alongside that person to do that. And we'll talk more about that in a second.
Yeah.
So when you think about building your senior management team, we talked about some of the mistakes of people moving too fast, hiring friends. We talked about why you're making some of these decisions. So let's talk about some solutions. And so we're going to move over to the front side of finding and locating the right person. And if you look at this, we kind of broke this down as you start your business and you're growing, and now you need to scale your team. You're now that $10 million mark, or $5 million, or $15 million mark, and you need to build your team. You maybe raise some funds. You need an executive team to support you. A lot of people do it yourself, and so doesn't mean they can't do it. It's one of those things. I have a brother-in-law who's a dentist, and he hired a consultant early on when he first started. He goes, because I know I could probably learn this stuff over 10 years. He goes, within a year, I was so much further along than I would have been. And the do-it-yourself can work. But often it's a lot of hard work, and it's frustrating because we often see these leaders of these organizations frustrated because of all the issues that we've highlighted. The other way to scale your team is really working with an executive recruiter and a group to help onboard and coach those executives. And it's interesting, you gave me a stat a while ago in San Francisco about the cost of recruiting and what it costs for turnover. And it's astronomical.
It really is. There's a Stanford study. I believe it's a Stanford study, and I'm going to break one of my own personal rules. I don't have a full citation here for you, but Stanford did conduct a study that found that there was anywhere from a 2x to a 3x productivity multiplier that every employee carries with them. And that's 2 to 3x on top of whatever their base salary is. And so that productivity multiplier is an impact on potential company revenue. So there's a whole field of HR study out there that will get specific down to the day level, how much it will cost your business by having a vacancy or a role open within your organization, let alone having gone through the process, having done it wrong, having to start all over at the beginning again and incurring those daily costs of not having somebody producing for your company.
Yeah, and so the costs it's not only your time, it's now productivity, and it's actually cost to the bottom line. So let's talk about some solutions. So Andy and I outlined 8 steps of building a senior management team. And so Andy, I'm going to have you start here.
Sure, yeah, happy to. One of the first steps, and I think a lot of the commentary we'll make today has a lot to do with being intentional and being purposeful about how you pursue both of these, both recruiting individuals and then onboarding them and getting them set up for success. One of the first ways to be intentional is implement a performance-based hiring system. What do we mean by performance-based hiring? Well, instead of framing what you need out of a position or a job that you want to hire for in terms of X number of years of experience or having worked for specific company logos, define the role in terms of what you need that individual to accomplish. So say if you're hiring a president or somebody who's going to lead revenue efforts for your organization, a VP of sales, frame the job and define it in terms of what you need that VP of sales to deliver for your business. So
when you say that, you're talking about certain revenue numbers, certain internal structures,
we're talking about specific revenue numbers. And you could define it in terms of all of those as well. Those are all highly valid. But in basic people strategy and HR thought, the org design that you create for your business should only be created for the reason of fulfilling the business objective.
Right.
Why would you design an organization or an org chart that didn't directly allow you to impact whatever your business goals are or fulfill them? So yeah, we're talking about real business goals.
So it even sounds like then, one, the organization needs to be very clear on what their business goals are and what that org chart needs to look like before just jumping in. I think a lot of people, they do it backwards, where they hear somebody says, oh, you need a chief revenue officer, or you need this.
Without stopping to ask why.
Why, and what's their role, and what are they supposed to be doing? And so it's really about getting it clear so you know what you're actually going to be trying to evaluate against, right?
Exactly.
And that takes some time, and it's an important step I think most people miss, right? They want to jump to the interview.
Exactly. The best people managers, and even if we're talking specifically about HR professionals, some of the best that I've had the privilege to work with in my career are always going to approach it from the business's perspective first. So think about the business goal, align your people and your processes in order to achieve that. So last comment on this point, performance-based hiring for, say, a VP of sales, if you know that you want to deliver an additional $5 million in annual recurring revenue for your business next year, go define the role in terms of somebody who has already proven that they can deliver $5 million in annual recurring revenue for their business in the past, and evaluate candidates based against those standards that you can objectively see whether or not they've done that.
Yeah, and then how did they make that happen, right?
Exactly.
And now you also talk about creating a usable scorecard. So tell me about that.
Exactly. So feeding off of what we just talked about, so say one of your performance-based standards is delivering 5 million of ARR in a given year, somebody who can build a sales organization of 20 to 25 individuals within a certain time frame, say 6 months, as well as somebody who will build a channel or alliance or a partner ecosystem as well. So you're turning each of these items into, think of them as checkboxes in an evaluation sheet or a scorecard that every single candidate you bring into your hiring process is going to be measured against. The key to this is objectivity, right, and universality. You're not going to use this scorecard for candidate A and a completely different set for candidate B because you're going to get inconsistent assessment. So use the exact same scorecard or set of criteria for every single candidate.
So interesting, as you're talking about that, I realized we have to kind of align the team, right?
Yeah.
So tell us about aligning the interview team. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, so when you think about the talent assessment process, your goal is to maximize your ability to predict somebody's success in the job. The whole point of getting good at interviewing as an organization is to be able to walk away from conversations with somebody and say, I am either less or more confident than I was before about this individual's ability to be successful here in our company. So how do you do that? Well, think about it this way. If you built a scorecard and it's defined in terms of what your business objectives are and it's detailed and it's specific, but you didn't hand it out to people so they knew what to go interview or assess for, how do you know you're going to be covering all of those different areas on the scorecard?
It also tells me making sure people know how to interview. Again, most people assume people know how to interview, right? And so not only is the scorecard, but making sure the team interviewing knows how to interview, because a lot of people don't know how to interview.
Correct. And not every single organization is going to have even a team of, say, first or second line people managers that have extensive interview training. There are a lot of free resources out there for folks to get their hands on about behavior-based interviewing, performance-based hiring. Spend the extra time to go look for some of those resources and make sure that you're choosing individuals to be a part of your interview team or your assessment process that have at least some basis of understanding or knowledge in how to assess people and how to interview. So in aligning your interview team, it starts with making sure the entire team that's going to take part in this knows exactly what that scorecard looks like, and that you've also divvied up each of those criteria amongst the interview team. Because say if you have 4 criteria and everybody decides they want to interview for number 1, well, you've missed 3 critical criteria that you need to screen for or assess for. So you got to make sure that every single one of them is covered in the process.
And then basically you're storing the data, right?
Yeah, that data that you're collecting in the process of interviewing is going to be valuable in a lot of different respects. At the end of the hiring process, say you've seen 5 different candidates and it comes time to make your hiring decision, how are you going to know who the best candidate was, other than, Johnny was a great guy, I really liked his suit, and we had a great conversation about barbecue. Right. That's not going to help your business. Having that scorecard data so you can make objective side-by-side comparisons of candidates is going to be super helpful. And even beyond the hire, when you're looking to assess whether or not the hire we made was the right one, you'll have that data to be able to go and measure that candidate against further down the line. So say at 3 months and at 6 months, if you were really intentional upfront and defined your business goals and the impact you wanted this person to have on your organization well, if those are all still accurate and true for your business, you'll be able to look at it and say, hey, we wanted this person to deliver 5 million of ARR in the first year. Did they do that?
Right. You'll be able to go back and actually see. And we're going to
Exactly.
now talk about that as we get into setting clear expectations up front. I think now that you've hired the right person, you gotta treat them like any other person on your team with high expectations. If you're a board, you would set expectations for the president. If you're the president, you'd be setting expectations for your team. And it's often missed, especially for younger, newer CEOs and leaders.
Yeah.
Set clear expectations. What do you want? What do you want to accomplish the first 90 days this next year? And any unspoken expectations. We often see there's these unspoken things that are cultural. You don't do things this way, or this is how we base decisions. Or so these new people coming into their culture need to know what are your clear, measurable expectations, and are there any cultural unspoken expectations I need to know how to operate within?
A lot of us are creatures of habit. You know, we get used to doing business the way we did at our last several companies, or how we've been conditioned to do it in the past. So even if it's something simple or operational in how we run day-to-day activities, if it's different here, we got to know that going into it.
Yes, definitely. Other thing is that we find it's important to understand to assess yourself and your team. What's your leadership style and what's your team's communication style? So there's a lot of tools out there. There's everything from DISC and work traits and Myers-Briggs and strength finders. There's a lot of great tools. We happen to use a tool called work traits that allows us to really see, based on you as a leader and your team, how compatible is the group? And it actually gives us a score of how compatible people are to work together. It also allows us to, how does that new leader build compatibility with each of their team members? And so he or she can go and click on it and say, based on this team member, this is how I'm going to be able to build a stronger working relationship. Yeah. Without having that, sometimes these new leaders are stumbling trying to get their new leader style, their personalities, what have you. And so what we found that accelerate that performance path is to get them, let me understand myself and my team. So as I get going, I'm clear on my expectations. I know how my team needs to operate. So as I set my expectations with them, I have a format to do it. The other thing is provide executive coaching. It's interesting. Stanford did a study back in 2013 on executive coaching, and it was out of the Graduate School of Business. And they said nearly 66% of CEOs do not receive it. The ones that do get higher performance, and I think you might have a stat on that actually. And then 100% of them want executive coaching. Think of the top performers. If you're an athlete, you have a coach to help you all throughout. It could be an eating coach, could be a running coach, could be your weightlifting coach, because they know they can't be expert at everything, but they need someone to help push them based on their skill set. And from an executive coaching standpoint too, there's a multiplier in terms of performance based on executive coaching.
Yeah, very much so. There was a 2012 study from, I believe, PwC and the Association Resource Center, I want to say, that said that there was a mean return on investment of coaching of 7x.
Right.
The mean return for coaching investment is 7x. That's
so
extraordinary.
It is. And think about organizations. You hire this great person, you want to be successful, but then you don't set them up. So if you can set up clear expectations, set up clear how your team needs to operate, and then provide them coaching, the return on your investment in terms of performance to really get you to where you want to achieve those business goals just grows immensely. The last thing is evaluate leadership skills consistently. We see this all the time. We have a tool we call the Collaborative Leader Assessment. We measure the trust of the leader and the employees on an ongoing basis. For a new leader, it'd be every 90 days. For an existing leader, about every 6 months. But it actually allows us to say, how well are you doing with your leadership? And 7 core areas that we know break or build trust. And we know that trust is the basis of all relationships. So if these leaders don't have it with their employees, they're not going to get high performance. And so not only setting the expectations, but let's measure the performance, and let's also measure how well they're leading and managing, especially if that's not your skill set as a senior. You're trying to build a senior management team who are better managers. You have to be able to evaluate and measure those.
And to a point you made before, I think this is super critical for executives, CEOs, leaders who might be earlier on in their entrepreneurial career,
That's right.
right? We do a lot of work with first-time founder CEOs who get to a point in building their senior management team where they need to bring in very seasoned, experienced veterans from the industry. And for an individual who's only been ever been a CEO and founder maybe once or even twice before, you're dealing with people who have a lot more experience. Most people are going to feel some form of intimidation in that setting, right? So if that's a situation that you find yourself in, getting yourself the ability or some help to be able to think through how do I, or even just a forum to discuss, how do I want to approach this situation where I'm supposedly supposed to be managing an individual who has 10, 20 years more experience than I do.
Yeah, and so, so when you think of you and your organization and trying to build your senior management team, if you're experiencing any of the issues we've talked about up front, from the revolving door, you can't seem to hire the right folks, you're hiring people, but they're not performing at the level you want them to, you're not hiring them quick enough and getting pressure from the outside to hire those folks, you're struggling with these people coming on and not performing, there's a couple of things. One, it may be your recruiting process, and it also may be your onboarding process. And more likely, it's a combination of the two that make successful traction to really get those people up and running and to allow you to not be focused as a leader on trying to build the team, getting a team that you've built to help you drive your vision to implementation. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions today. We had a lot of good topic with Andy here today. I see Stefan and Sherry, Nick, and Jill have submitted some questions. So what we might do is answer those questions via our follow-up email. Also, feel free to take our white paper as well, and there will be a white paper on this topic to help give you some more insight. At the end of the day, turnover is expensive and disruptive for fast-growing companies. We all know that. We all feel that when that person comes in and leaves, or that person you have to give a notice that you no longer want on your team. But it's through truly a collaborative effort between the right professionals and coaches, like you would as an athlete, to help build your business both on the recruiting side and the executive development side to allow you to truly build that scalable, profitable business that you desire and help your dreams come to reality. So if you'd like more information, feel free to contact Andy as well, or myself, and we'll be happy to reach out to you and answer any other questions. Building a team is tough and hard, but it doesn't have to be if you have the right support team working around you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thank you very much, and we hope you have a great day and continue building those amazing businesses.